The story begins on a quiet evening when the world outside felt unusually still, as if something inside the universe was holding its breath, waiting for a truth that had been buried for years to finally rise to the surface. It was the kind of silence that made even the smallest sound feel louder, and that quiet weight in the air surrounded Keanu Reeves as he sat alone in a dim, warm room with soft lights touching the walls. He had been asked a simple question during a private interview, but somewhere deep inside he knew that nothing about his answer would ever be simple. The question had awakened something he had kept hidden for years, something he had learned to protect with gentleness and silence. And now, for the first time in a long time, he felt unable to look away from it. The interviewer had not expected the sudden shift in his eyes, the way his voice paused for a moment that lasted longer than anyone thought it would. She had asked him what people often wondered, but never heard him explain directly. She asked why he never let go of Sandra Bullock, not in his memories, not in his heart, and not even in the way he spoke about her with unshaken warmth after so many years. It was a question that forced him to return to a moment he had tried to understand but never fully healed from. And as he leaned back gently, his voice soft and steady, he knew he could no longer hide from the truth he had lived with in silence. The beginning of the truth was not dramatic in the way people imagine Hollywood stories to be. It was quiet, delicate, made of small moments that became big memories. It had started on the set of the movie where he and Sandra first worked together. They were young, full of hope, uncertain about their futures, and unaware of how deeply two lives could connect without ever planning it. From the first day, Sandra had walked onto the set with a simple smile that felt warm even in the coldest morning air. She carried a lightness around her, a gentle presence that drew people toward her without effort. Keanu noticed it immediately, but what he felt was not the usual admiration actors had for each other. It was something different, something calm yet strong, like a quiet wind that enters a room and changes the way the air feels. He remembered the first long conversation they had, sitting near a corner where equipment was piled up, taking a break between scenes. Sandra had laughed as she struggled to open a small snack, pretending it was the most dramatic thing she had ever dealt with, and he had laughed too, not at the joke itself, but at the kindness behind it. She had a way of making simple moments feel meaningful. She could turn tension into ease, pressure into comfort, and insecurity into honesty. And he found himself telling her things he never shared with people he barely knew. She listened with her full attention, not as a star, not as a coworker, but as someone who understood how heavy silence could be in the life of a person who rarely talked about his own emotions. It became natural for them to spend time together even without planning it. Sometimes they would sit quietly before scenes, not speaking because neither of them needed to fill the space with words. Sometimes they would share stories about their childhood, about the strange and funny things that shaped who they became. And other times they would talk about fears they rarely admitted to anyone else. Sandra often said she feared disappointing people she cared about. Keanu admitted he feared losing people he cared about. It was a truth he rarely let himself say out loud, but with Sandra, he felt safe enough to say it. Something in her eyes made him feel seen in a way he had not felt in years. Day after day, these small exchanges built something quiet and deep between them, something that neither of them named. The world would later call it chemistry, but for them, it was simply two people finding comfort in each other during a time when everything around them felt uncertain. They laughed together, supported each other, and learned to trust each other without even realizing it. And although the movie was filled with high-energy scenes, the moments he remembered most were the soft ones, the ones where she rested her head on his shoulder while waiting for a shot to be set, or the ones where she looked at him with a softness that seemed to reach straight through the noise of life. These were the moments that stayed with him long after the cameras stopped. But all good moments eventually collide with the real world, and when filming ended, they faced the painful truth that not everything soft and meaningful automatically survives the changes of life. Both of them were suddenly surrounded by new responsibilities, new projects, new expectations. They promised to stay close, and they believed they would because their bond felt strong and sincere. But life has a way of pushing people apart even when they don't want it to happen. Schedules took over, distance grew without intention, and time slowly created a quiet space between them that neither of them fully knew how to cross. Keanu felt it first during a night when he returned home after a long day of work. He sat on his couch, exhausted, and reached for his phone without thinking. For a moment, he wanted to call Sandra to hear her laugh, to tell her about something funny that happened on set. But something in him hesitated. It was not fear of rejection. It was fear of bothering her, fear that maybe she was busy or tired or simply too far away from the world they used to share. And that hesitation became the beginning of a pattern. He never meant to pull away, but he did, slowly, quietly, gently, until one day he realized he had allowed too much time to pass without hearing her voice. Sandra felt the distance too, but she did not blame him. She understood how life could swallow people whole, especially people who carried emotional weight behind their calm smiles. She always sensed when someone was hurting even when they did not say it. She had told him once that she could read sadness in him even when he tried to hide it, and after filming ended, she worried he was hiding again. She sent him messages sometimes, soft ones, small ones, telling him she hoped he was doing well, telling him she thought of him. He always replied with kindness, always polite, always warm, but she could tell he was slipping into his old silence, that quiet form of self-protection he used to carry like a shadow. They both cared deeply, but caring is not always enough when distance begins to grow without warning. Months passed, then years, and though they crossed paths many times, each meeting felt like a reminder of something unfinished, something fragile, something beautiful that neither of them had learned how to hold. And then came the moment that changed everything for Keanu, the moment that became the reason he never let go of Sandra Bullock. It happened during a night when he received a call that left him breathless and shaken, a call that told him news that froze him where he stood. It was news that reminded him how quickly life could shift, how quickly people could be taken away, how quickly regret could bloom into something painful and lasting. He had already lost too many important people in his life, and now the possibility of losing one more felt unbearable. The call told him something had happened to someone close to him, someone he cared about with quiet devotion, someone who reminded him of how fragile life truly was. And as he listened, his thoughts went immediately to Sandra. It was not her who was hurt, but the fear that he could lose her one day without ever telling her what she meant to him, crashed into him so strongly that he couldn't breathe for a moment. He sat down on the floor, his heart pounding, realizing he had spent too many years holding his feelings in silence. And the truth that emerged from that fear was simple and painful. He had never let go of her because he had never stopped caring, not even for a moment. He had cared through distance, through silence, through the passing years. That night changed something inside him. It made him see how easily life could close without giving him the chance to say what he never said. It made him see that kindness, connection, and love were not things to be buried under time. It made him see how deeply regret could cut when someone disappears without warning. And in that moment, he knew he had allowed too much of his heart to remain unspoken. As he stood up and walked across the room, the weight of the unspoken truth grew heavier. He picked up his phone and stared at her name on the screen, his hands trembling slightly. He wanted to tell her everything, to tell her what he had kept in silence for years, to tell her why he never let her go even when the world tried to pull them in different directions. But before he could make the call, something unexpected happened. Something that changed the direction of their story in a way he never anticipated. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Sandra. A message that simply said she needed to talk to him because something important had happened. And the moment he read it, his heart dropped. Because he knew, deep inside, that whatever she was about to tell him was going to change everything. When Keanu stared at the message on his phone, he felt the air in the room grow heavier, as if time itself had slowed down. Sandra rarely sent him messages that sounded urgent. She was gentle even when she had serious things to say, so seeing her words written so plainly made something inside him tighten. He read the message again, his heart beating faster now, the memory of the earlier emotional call still echoing inside his chest. He knew this moment mattered. He knew life had a way of waking people up at the exact time they needed to face their truth, and something about her message felt like that kind of moment. He sat down, suddenly aware that his hands were trembling slightly. He tried to steady his breathing, but worry moved through him too quickly, pulling at old memories, old regrets, old fears he had never learned to quiet. He remembered the last time Sandra had looked at him with that kind of weight behind her smile, the kind of weight that told him something was bothering her long before she spoke. It happened years ago on a set where everything around them was loud, crowded, full of activity, yet she had stood at the edge of the room looking small and thoughtful. Even then, he had sensed something was hurting her. She was good at hiding pain from others, but never from him. He always saw through her gentleness, through her jokes, through the way she deflected questions with humor. He always knew when she was hurting, even when she didn't say it. And now, reading her message, He could feel that same quiet ache coming through her words. He took a deep breath and typed back, asking her if she was okay and if he should call her right away. His message was simple, but the emotion behind it was strong. He waited, feeling every second stretch longer than the one before it. He walked around the room, unable to sit still, replaying in his mind the times she had opened up to him about difficult moments in her life. She did not share easily. She only shared when she trusted someone deeply. His phone buzzed again. This time her message was longer. She said she was not hurt, but something important had happened, something that made her think about him in a way she could not ignore. She said she needed to talk in person, not through text, because she did not want her words to be misheard or misunderstood. She asked if he could meet her somewhere quiet, somewhere away from cameras, away from noise, away from anything that might distract them. She asked for something simple, something honest, something only he could give her. And without hesitation, Keanu agreed. They chose a small, private place they had both gone to a few times in the past, a quiet garden hidden behind an old building, a place where the world felt peaceful and the noise of life softened. It was the kind of location that never appeared in magazines, never attracted crowds, never felt artificial. It was private, calm, safe. They had gone there once during filming years ago, sitting under a tree, sharing stories about the things that scared them the most. He remembered that day vividly. He remembered how easily she had opened up to him, how her voice had trembled when she talked about losing people she cared about, how she feared becoming distant from people she loved. And he remembered how he had shared his own fears, the ones he kept buried, the fear of not being able to protect people he cared about, the fear of losing them before he had the chance to tell them how he felt. Now, years later, they were returning to that same place. He arrived early, unable to stay still at home. He walked into the garden and felt the familiar calmness settle around him, but it did nothing to quiet the storm inside him. He stood near the tree where they once talked, gently running his fingers over the bark, remembering her laughter echoing softly through the branches. Everything felt heavy now, as if the garden itself understood that a truth long kept in silence was finally coming to the surface. Then he heard footsteps. Slow, steady, familiar. He turned, and there she was. Sandra walked toward him with a soft expression, but her eyes carried a weight he had not seen in a long time. She looked tired in a way that did not come from a lack of sleep, but from carrying something emotional for too long. She wore simple clothes, nothing glamorous, nothing meant for the public eye. She looked real, unfiltered, exactly like the Sandra he knew behind the scenes, and when their eyes met, something inside him tightened with emotion. She smiled gently, but it was not her usual bright smile. It was softer, weaker, filled with something fragile. He walked toward her, and for a moment they just stood there, looking at each other without speaking. It was a silence that felt meaningful, the kind that holds truth behind it. Finally, she whispered his name. He said hers in return, his voice warm, careful, protective. Then she took a slow breath and told him something that made his heart sink. She said she had recently learned news that shook her deeply, something personal that forced her to look at her life in a way she had avoided for years. She said it made her think about the people who truly mattered to her, the people who shaped who she became, the people she should never have allowed distance to separate her from. And she said his name again, as if reminding him he was one of those people, maybe the most important one she had not held onto closely enough. She told him about someone she lost, someone who had been important to her, someone she thought she would have more time with but didn't. The pain in her voice told him how deeply that loss cut her. She explained that the news came suddenly, without warning, and it reminded her of how fragile life was, how quickly things could change, how easily people could disappear. She said the loss forced her to confront something she had buried for years. Her fear of being honest about her feelings, her fear of ruining friendships by wanting too much, her fear of getting hurt. And then she looked at him with a trembling expression and said she realized something important. She had spent too many years pretending she was not affected by their distance, pretending she did not miss him, pretending she was okay with the quiet space between them. But she wasn't okay with it. She had tried to convince herself she was, but the recent loss made her see the truth clearly. She missed him. She missed the comfort they once shared, the trust they built, the unspoken understanding that made even silence feel safe. She missed the way he looked at her with the kind of gentleness that made her feel seen. She missed knowing he was a steady part of her life. He listened quietly, each word pulling him deeper into his own emotions. He felt the heaviness in her voice, the vulnerability she rarely showed, the bravery it took for her to admit these feelings. He could see the pain in her eyes, and he wanted desperately to comfort her, to tell her he felt the same ache, to tell her she had never once left his heart. But before he could speak, she continued. She said the loss made her realize something even more difficult. She might have made a mistake by letting fear dictate her decisions. She feared that getting too close to him would confuse things, complicate things, or ruin the simple beauty of their connection. She had convinced herself that stepping back was safer, kinder, easier. But now she saw that stepping back had only created more distance than she ever wanted. She said she had carried the weight of that regret quietly, always wondering what would have happened if she had been brave enough to stay close. Her voice shook as she said these words, and Keanu felt tears building behind his eyes. He remembered the moments when he had felt the same fear, when he had stopped himself from reaching out, when he had convinced himself he was protecting her by staying silent. He realized they had both been protecting each other from something they did not fully understand, and in doing so, they had protected themselves into distance. He took a small step closer, gently touching her arm. She did not pull away. Instead, she closed her eyes for a moment, as if grounding herself in the warmth of his touch. She looked at him again and said something that broke him open inside. She said she needed to know if he felt the same way, if he also wondered about the moments they missed, the conversations they didn't have, the closeness they allowed to fade even though neither of them truly wanted that distance. Her voice softened, almost a whisper, as she asked him why he had never let go of her through all these years, why he still spoke gently about her, why he still protected her name with such care, why he still carried a quiet tenderness in his words whenever she came up in conversations. She asked him if he had kept a part of her in his heart, the same way she kept a part of him in hers. His heart ached with emotion. Everything he had kept silent for years rose inside him, heavy and real. He felt the truth pulling at him with undeniable strength. He wanted to tell her everything, every moment he missed her, every time he had thought of calling her, every regret he carried, every feeling he had buried under fear. He wanted to tell her that she was the reason he learned to value the softness in life, the reason he believed in gentle connections, the reason he held onto certain memories so tightly. He wanted to tell her that he never let go of her because she had become a part of him in a way he could never replace. He opened his mouth to speak. But just as he did, Sandra suddenly looked past him, her eyes widening with shock. Her breath caught. She whispered his name with fear. And before he could turn around to see what she saw, a voice from behind him interrupted the moment. A voice neither of them expected. A voice that would change everything they were about to say the moment the unfamiliar voice broke through the quiet air of the garden. Sandra's breath tightened, and Keanu felt the energy around them shift sharply. The peaceful space that once felt safe and gentle now felt tense, as if something heavy had stepped between them. Keanu turned slowly, his heart pounding not only from the emotional truth he had been seconds away from speaking, but from the sudden interruption that carried a strange, unsettling tone. When he looked behind him, he saw a figure standing a few steps away, half shaded by the low evening light. It was someone neither of them had expected to see there. It was a man Keanu recognized from years ago, someone who had worked with both him and Sandra on a past project, someone who had always seemed harmless on the surface, but carried an unpredictable edge beneath his smile. His name was Martin, a producer who had been around during a time when both Keanu and Sandra were caught in the noise of Hollywood rumors, pressure, and public expectations. Martin had been the kind of person who noticed things others missed, the kind who watched quietly and remembered too much. They had not spoken to him in years, and there was no reason for him to be there now. Yet here he was. Martin stepped closer, wearing a rigid smile that didn't match the tension in his eyes. Sandra's body stiffened slightly, a reaction Keanu noticed immediately. He moved a step closer to her without thinking, positioning himself in a way that made her feel protected, even if the situation didn't yet demand that kind of protection. But Keanu's instinct had always been to shield the people he cared about, especially when something felt wrong. Martin greeted them as if they were meeting casually, but his tone carried something sharp beneath the surface. He said he had been walking nearby and happened to see them enter the garden. He claimed it was a coincidence, a harmless moment, but nothing about his presence felt harmless. The garden was private, tucked away, rarely visited. It was too unlikely that Martin had simply stumbled upon them without intention. Sandra kept her expression calm, but Keanu could see that her earlier vulnerability had been replaced by alertness. He wanted to ask Martin why he was there, but something about the man's smile made him hold back for a moment. Martin walked toward them slowly, the way a person walks when they want to see your reaction more than they want to greet you. He made a comment about how surprising it was to find the two of them together, especially after so many years of rumors and stories. He spoke casually, but the emphasis on his words felt intentional. Keanu's jaw tightened. He remembered all too well how Martin had once tried to stir unnecessary drama between cast members to generate publicity. He had been the kind of producer who believed any story was good if it got attention, even if the story came at someone's emotional expense. Keanu had never liked him, and Sandra had trusted him even less. Now, seeing him here at this exact moment felt suspicious. Martin glanced at Sandra and commented on how she looked troubled, as if he sensed she was in the middle of something personal. She forced a polite smile, one that did not reach her eyes. She said she and Keanu were just talking, catching up, reconnecting after a long time. Martin raised an eyebrow, studying them, clearly aware there was more beneath the surface. Keanu stepped forward slightly. His voice stayed calm, steady, respectful, but there was a quiet firmness behind it. He told Martin they were in the middle of a private conversation and asked if he needed something. It was a simple question, but Martin reacted to it with a smirk, as if he found amusement in their discomfort. He glanced between them again before admitting he did have a reason for being there. He said he had information he thought they should know, something that concerned both of them. Keanu and Sandra exchanged a glance. The timing felt too strange, too pointed, too intrusive. Sandra asked him what he meant, her voice careful, steady, but carrying a small tremor beneath the surface. Martin looked at her for a long moment before speaking, and his next words dropped like cold stones between them. He said someone had been spreading a story in the industry, a story about the two of them, a story that resurfaced after years of silence. A story that portrayed their relationship in a way that was not only untrue but deeply personal. He said the story claimed that Sandra had once confessed feelings to Keanu on a set years ago, and that Keanu had rejected her harshly. He said the rumor painted Keanu as cold and Sandra as heartbroken. He added that people were sharing the story again because of recent events in Sandra's life, twisting it into something dramatic and exploitive. Sandra's face fell, her eyes darkened with a mix of confusion and hurt. Keanu felt something hot rise inside him, a quiet anger that grew quickly. He had never been someone who reacted with rage, but the idea that someone manipulated their emotional bond for attention or gossip ignited something protective inside him. He told Martin the story was false, and Martin nodded as if he already knew. He said the rumor felt familiar, like someone had been waiting for the right moment to bring it back into public attention. Keanu asked who started it. Martin hesitated. Then he said a name both Keanu and Sandra recognized immediately. A name that made Sandra's eyes widen in disbelief. It was someone who had once been close to Sandra, a person she had trusted deeply. Someone who had been around during a vulnerable time in her life, someone who knew the sensitive truth behind her emotional struggles. Someone she had confided in, thinking the person cared enough to protect her words. But now, hearing that this person had spread a false story, Sandra felt the ground beneath her shift. Her breath trembled as she whispered the name, barely able to believe it. Keanu stepped closer, his expression darkening. He had known that Sandra had been hurt before by people she trusted, but he never expected this particular betrayal. Sandra's hands shook slightly. She had shared personal fears with that person, fears about her career, fears about relationships, fears about Keanu, fears she had trusted would stay private. Martin continued speaking, saying the rumor was only the beginning. He said the story was gaining attention, and soon the press might reach out to both of them. He said people would twist the story further, using it to create drama, to stir speculation, to resurrect old headlines that never should have existed. And then he stepped closer and lowered his voice, as if delivering the most important part of his message. He said someone had given the press more than just the rumor. Someone had given them a photograph of Keanu and Sandra together many years ago, one that looked intimate, emotional, and deeply private. Sandra's heart dropped. She remembered the photo immediately. She remembered the night it was taken. It was not a romantic moment, not in the way the public would assume. It was a moment when she was crying quietly backstage after receiving bad news about a family member. Keanu had found her sitting alone, trying to hide her tears, and he had knelt beside her to comfort her. Someone passing by must have taken the photo without them noticing. It had been a moment of kindness, not scandal. A moment of comfort, not gossip. A moment of trust, not drama. Keanu's expression hardened. He remembered that night clearly, too. He remembered holding her as she cried, his hand gently resting on her back as she trembled. He remembered telling her she didn't have to pretend she was strong all the time. He remembered the way she had looked at him afterward with grateful eyes, finding safety in his presence. Now, hearing that someone used that moment against her, against them, filled him with a quiet, controlled anger he rarely allowed himself to feel. Sandra's voice cracked as she asked Martin why he was telling them this. Martin said he thought they should know before the story escalated. He said he didn't want them to be blindsided. Then he paused, looking at them with a strange mix of sympathy and calculation, as if he was trying to decide whether to say the next thing. After a moment, he added that the press believed Keanu and Sandra had once been romantically involved and that their relationship had fallen apart due to emotional disagreements. He said he heard people were preparing headlines that painted their connection as tragic and dramatic. Sandra felt her chest tighten painfully. She had built her life on kindness, privacy, and authenticity. She never wanted personal emotions turned into entertainment. Keanu placed a gentle hand on her arm, grounding her. He could feel how shaken she was. Sandra whispered that she did not want the world to twist their truth, not now, not ever. She looked at him with a pain that made him want to protect her from everything pressing in on them. Martin watched them quietly, then said something unexpected. He said the person who spread the rumor did not just talk to the press. They had also mentioned something personal about Sandra. Something Keanu didn't know. Something Sandra had kept hidden. Keanu felt a chill move through him. He turned slowly toward Sandra, his eyes searching hers. She looked down, tears gathering in her lashes, her shoulders trembling slightly. Martin stepped back, realizing he had said enough. He told them he would leave them alone, but they should prepare themselves because the story might come out soon. He said he believed they needed to talk openly before anything worse happened. Then he walked away, disappearing behind the gate. Silence returned to the garden, but now it felt heavier, darker, filled with a truth that had not yet been spoken. Keanu turned back to Sandra. She stood still, her hands clasped together, her breathing unsteady. He stepped closer, gently touching her arm, guiding her to sit beneath the old tree where they once shared their fears years ago. She sat slowly, her eyes distant, her voice fragile. He sat beside her, giving her space yet letting her feel he was there. She looked down at her hands and whispered something that shook him to his core. She said there was a reason she pulled away from him years ago. A reason she never told him. A reason she thought would protect both of them. A reason she feared would hurt him if he knew. Keanu leaned closer, his heart pounding, his voice soft and steady as he asked her what she meant. Sandra swallowed hard, tears sliding down her cheeks. She said the person who spread the rumor knew her secret. And the secret was about Keanu. A secret she kept, because she was afraid the truth would change the way he looked at her forever. She finally raised her eyes to his. And then she told him the words he never expected to hear the moment Sandra lifted her eyes toward him. Keanu felt the air shift again, heavier now, as if the truth she carried was too big for the quiet garden around them. Her gaze trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of something she had kept buried for far too long. He could see the fear in her expression, the fear of hurting him, the fear of disappointing him, the fear of revealing something that might change everything they were finally beginning to uncover between them. And because he understood her so deeply, he stayed completely still, giving her space, giving her time, giving her the silent reassurance that whatever she said, he would listen with his whole heart. She took a shaky breath, her hands twisted together, the gesture small but filled with tension. She lowered her eyes again, unable to hold his gaze while saying the words forming inside her. She whispered that the reason she had pulled away years ago was not only because of fear, not only because of career pressure, not only because of the confusing closeness they shared. She said there had been something else, something she had learned, something that made her step back without telling him why. Keanu felt a slow ache rise inside him. He remembered the years of distance, the unanswered questions, the quiet moments when he wondered whether he had done something to push her away. He had carried that question inside him for a long time, even though he tried to bury it behind understanding and patience. Now, hearing her speak with such trembling honesty, he realized the truth might be far more painful than he imagined. He leaned closer, gently placing his hand over hers. She didn't pull away. Her fingers clung to his lightly, seeking comfort, seeking strength. She whispered that before she had distanced herself, someone close to her had told her something that involved him. Someone she trusted, someone she believed had her best interests at heart. That person had told her a story about Keanu, a story that painted him as someone who didn't want deep connections, someone who preferred emotional distance, someone who avoided closeness because it scared him. They had said he spoke about her feelings as if they were harmless, temporary, not something he took seriously. The person suggested that if she allowed herself to get too attached to him, she would end up hurt because he wasn't emotionally available in the way she needed. The words struck Keanu deeply. He felt a cold shock move through him. He had never said anything like that. He had never dismissed her feelings. He had never spoken carelessly about her. The idea that someone had used his name to push her away stung sharply, like a wound reopening after years of silence. He asked her softly who told her that, but she shook her head, tears forming again. She said she would tell him, but not yet. She said the name wasn't the most important part. The important part was the truth behind what she believed. She explained that she had already been unsure about her own emotions at the time. She had cared for him more deeply than she realized, and that scared her. She feared mixing professionalism with personal feelings. She feared being vulnerable in a world that judged her constantly. She feared losing him if she spoke too openly. And then, when someone she trusted told her he didn't feel the same way, she believed them. She believed it because it felt safer than facing the truth. She believed it because it protected her from the fear of hearing rejection directly from him. She believed it because she had always been afraid of wanting too much. As she spoke, her voice cracked. She said she didn't pull away because she stopped caring. She pulled away because she cared too much and didn't know how to handle it. She pulled away because she thought Keanu deserved someone stronger, someone less afraid, someone who wouldn't hesitate. She pulled away because she believed she might become a burden on him. She pulled away because she didn't want to complicate his life with her fears. Keanu felt a painful mix of sadness and tenderness. He wanted to interrupt, to tell her she had never been a burden, that he had never thought of her that way, that he had always admired her strength even in her most vulnerable moments. But he let her continue, because he could sense she needed to let the truth flow out of her completely, without interruption, without pressure. She said there was more. The garden fell quiet. The light softened as the sun lowered behind the building, casting a gentle glow on her face. She closed her eyes briefly, as if gathering courage. When she opened them again, tears slipped down her cheeks, slow and quiet. She whispered that the real reason she stepped away from him was because she loved him. The words hung in the air, fragile and heartbreaking. Not a crush, not a passing emotion, not a fleeting connection. She said she loved him in a way that terrified her, in a way that made her feel vulnerable in a world that demanded strength from her every day. She loved him in a way that made her feel calm and safe, but also scared of losing him. She loved him in a way that made her want to protect him from everything, even from herself. And because of that, she chose distance, thinking it was the only way to avoid pain for both of them. She whispered that she believed she could let the feeling fade with time, that she could convince herself it was temporary. She thought focusing on work would help. She thought the distance would help. She thought avoiding difficult conversations would help. But the feeling didn't fade. It lingered quietly, gently, painfully, especially whenever she saw him in interviews, smiling politely, speaking kindly about her. Every time she saw him, the ache returned. Every time someone mentioned him, her heart tightened. And yet she stayed silent. Keanu felt his heart twist. He had always known there was something between them, something unspoken, something deep, something fragile. But hearing her say the words so clearly, so painfully, forced him to face his own hidden truth. He swallowed hard, trying to steady his emotions, trying to understand the full weight of what she had carried alone for years. She continued speaking, her voice trembling. She said she knew the person who betrayed her trust had told the press some of her personal confessions. She said they must have overheard her years ago when she quietly admitted her feelings to someone else, someone she thought would keep her secret safe. She said she never intended for anyone outside that moment to know. She said she never thought the past would come back in such a cruel way. Keanu's breathing deepened, his chest tight with a mix of empathy, regret, and something deeper, something he had kept hidden from himself for too long. He reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. She leaned into the touch, her eyes closing for a moment. The simple gesture brought back memories of nights when he comforted her, moments when she looked at him with quiet gratitude, afternoons when they laughed without knowing how important those laughs would become. Then she said something that made him freeze. She said she never stopped loving him. Not once. Not through the distance. Not through the silence. Not through the years apart. She said it softly, almost fearfully, as if preparing to lose him the moment the truth left her lips. Keanu felt the world stand still. He had spent years burying his feelings, protecting her from the intensity of what he felt, convincing himself that staying silent was an act of kindness. But now, hearing her truth spoken so openly, the emotions he had buried began to rise like a tide he could no longer suppress. He felt the weight of all the years they lost because of fear, because of rumors, because of people who interfered, because they were both too gentle with each other to risk honesty. He opened his mouth to speak, but Sandra quickly shook her head, fresh tears streaming down her face. She said she wasn't done yet. There was something else. Something she had never told him. Something she had carried alone because she thought it would protect him. Something she feared he would hate her for. He assured her gently that nothing she said would make him hate her, but she shook her head again, insisting he didn't know the full truth. She took a deep breath, her voice breaking as she spoke. She whispered that years ago, when she was at her most vulnerable, when her feelings for him were the strongest and most overwhelming, she found out something about him, something serious, something painful, something he never talked about publicly. Someone told her that Keanu was going through something deeply emotional, something that would only get more complicated if he had someone close to him. She was told that if she reached out to him while he was dealing with that hardship, she might make things worse. She might pressure him, she might hurt him unintentionally. She said that was why she stepped back. She stepped back to protect him, not herself. She loved him so deeply that she believed she had to let him go to avoid adding more emotional burden to his life. She said she spent years regretting that choice, questioning it, wondering if she had misunderstood the situation entirely. And when she later learned that some of the information she was given had been exaggerated or twisted, it broke her. She realized she had let someone else's interpretation of his life dictate the distance between them. Keanu felt something inside him fracture. He finally understood the full picture, the years of confusion, the unanswered questions, the emotional distance that never made sense. He realized they had both been manipulated by people who claimed to care but acted out of their own self-interest. He felt a deep sorrow for the lonely years they could have faced together, for the moments they lost, for the comfort they could have shared. Sandra looked at him with trembling fear and whispered that she was afraid to tell him all of this sooner. She feared he wouldn't understand. She feared he would think she abandoned him for selfish reasons. She feared he would resent her. She feared she had ruined any chance of ever returning to the closeness they once had. Keanu exhaled slowly, overwhelmed by emotion. He reached for her hand again and held it tightly, wanting her to feel the truth in his touch. He told her quietly that he never resented her, that he never once blamed her. He said he always felt there was a reason behind everything, even if he didn't know it. He said her honesty now meant more to him than anything that had happened in the past. Sandra's lips trembled. She whispered that there was still one more truth he needed to hear. He froze slightly, not out of fear, but out of the intensity of the moment. She took another deep breath, her voice so quiet he almost didn't hear her. She said the reason she reached out to him now, the reason she needed to talk urgently, was not only because of the rumor, not only because of the photograph, not only because of the betrayal. She said she recently learned something else. Something that involved both of them. Something she could no longer keep from him. She looked into his eyes, tears falling freely now. And with a trembling voice, she whispered the words that made Keanu's heart stop. She told him she wasn't the only one who kept a secret. Because someone had also told her his secret. A secret she never expected. A secret about how he once felt about her. And the moment she learned it, she realized everything could have been different when Sandra whispered that she had learned Keanu once kept a secret of his own. Something about how he felt about her. Keanu felt his entire body tense, not from fear, but from the overwhelming collision of past and present. For years, he had lived with the quiet ache of everything he never said, everything he never allowed himself to express, everything he hid behind calm smiles and gentle words. And now, as she looked at him through trembling tears, he realized the past itself was finally rising into the light, piece by piece, moment by moment, until there was no silence left to hide behind. He leaned in slightly, trying to steady his breathing. His heart pounded in slow, heavy beats. He asked her softly what she meant, but she didn't answer immediately. She was staring at his hands, her fingers trembling as if trying to decide whether to reach for him or pull away. The hesitation in her movements was not because she doubted him, but because she feared the truth might break something fragile between them if she spoke it too quickly. She took a slow breath, her voice barely above a whisper as she explained what she had been told. She said someone from Keanu's past, someone who had known him during the years after their first movie together, had once whispered something to her during a quiet moment at an event. She said she hadn't taken it seriously at the time because it felt too unbelievable, too hopeful, too painful to hold on to. But now, after everything that happened, after all the rumors and betrayals, after all the emotional distance, she realized that the truth she had run away from might have been beside her the entire time. She told Keanu that she had been told he once had deep feelings for her too. Keanu froze. For a moment he forgot how to breathe. He tried to form words, but his voice felt trapped behind the sudden surge of emotion rising inside him. Sandra continued speaking softly, explaining that the person had told her he had once confided in someone close to him about her, about how he admired her deeply, how he cared for her in a way he could never explain. She said the person claimed he avoided talking about her publicly because he wanted to protect her from media chaos, not because he didn't care. She said she didn't know whether to believe it, because at the time she feared it might be a misunderstanding, or an exaggeration, or simply wishful thinking from someone who saw the connection they shared. She feared clinging to that hope would only make her feel foolish when life eventually pushed them apart. So she buried it. She buried it because believing something beautiful felt harder than believing something painful. She buried it because she didn't trust herself to hope. Keanu's throat tightened. He blinked, trying to stop the sting in his eyes. He asked her quietly who told her that. She hesitated again before saying it was someone who had been part of the same project they had worked on years ago, someone who had been around them during long nights of filming and had noticed the unspoken tenderness between them, someone who saw more than they realized they were showing. Keanu remembered that time vividly. He remembered how often people whispered near them, how many crew members exchanged knowing smiles when they looked at each other a little too long, laughed a little too softly, or shared silent moments between scenes. But he also remembered something else. He remembered the late-night conversation he once had with a friend, a conversation he never intended for anyone else to hear. He had spoken about Sandra that night, spoken with a softness he rarely allowed himself. He had told his friend that being around Sandra felt like breathing lighter air. He said she brought calm into chaotic days, warmth into cold mornings, laughter into quiet spaces. He admitted he cared for her in a way that scared him, because he didn't want to complicate her life with the heaviness he carried inside him. He remembered saying he wasn't ready to open his heart at the time, not with everything he had already lost, not with the emotional wounds he hadn't fully healed from. And he remembered his friend listening quietly. Had that been the moment someone overheard him? Had that been the source of the secret she learned? The realization sent a chill through him. He looked at Sandra, his breath trembling slightly. She continued speaking, her voice fragile. She said she didn't know if the story was true, but hearing it again now, years later, after everything they experienced, after the emotional walls they kept between them, she felt something inside her break open. She said it pained her to think that maybe, just maybe, they both loved each other at the same time, but both were too afraid, too wounded, too cautious, too surrounded by interference to say the words they needed to say. She looked at him with tear-filled eyes and whispered that life felt unfair for letting two people care so deeply yet be pulled apart by fear, by false assumptions, by rumors, by the voices of others who didn't understand the quiet depth of their connection. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, trying to calm the swirl of emotions inside him. The truth of what she said hit him with devastating clarity. He whispered that he had indeed cared for her, more than he ever admitted, more than he ever allowed himself to acknowledge. He told her he had been terrified of burdening her with his emotions, especially during a time when he was dealing with grief and personal struggles he didn't know how to share. He told her he had convinced himself that staying silent was protecting her, even though deep down it had been protecting himself too. Sandra covered her mouth with her hand, the revelation hitting her harder than she expected. She whispered that she wished she had known because maybe everything could have been different. Her shoulders trembled. She leaned forward slightly, her tears falling freely now. Keanu reached for her gently, placing his hand on her back as he used to in the past, grounding her quietly, letting her know she was not alone. She whispered that life had kept them apart long enough, and that she didn't want to run from him anymore, not now, not after everything they survived, not after all the truths they finally revealed. She said she didn't want to lose him again, not to fear, not to rumors, not to the voices of people who didn't care about their hearts. She said she wanted to move forward with honesty, with courage, with the kind of tenderness they always felt but never allowed themselves to express openly. Keanu felt something inside him melt, a quiet, aching relief that felt like finally stepping into warm light after standing in shadow for years. He moved closer, gently lifting her chin so she could look at him. He told her she had never lost him, not truly, not even through silence. He said he had carried her memories, her laughter, her kindness with him in every chapter of his life. He said she had been the soft place he returned to in his mind whenever the world felt too heavy. Her tears deepened. She whispered that she had waited years to hear something like that from him, even though she convinced herself she didn't deserve it. He shook his head softly, brushing away her tears. He told her she deserved every gentle truth in the world. They sat together beneath the old tree, holding hands in a silence that felt warm, healing, full of years of unspoken emotion finally breaking free. For a moment, it felt like time had stitched itself together, healing old wounds one breath at a time. But the calm didn't last, because Sandra suddenly inhaled sharply, as if remembering something urgent, something she hadn't yet told him. She pulled her hand back slightly, wiping her tears quickly. Her eyes widened with fear again, fear not of the past, but of something present, something real, something she had been trying to gather the strength to say since the moment she arrived in the garden. She whispered that the reason she reached out to him urgently, before the rumor spread, before the photo resurfaced, before the betrayal became public, was because she discovered something bigger. Something that affected not only her reputation or his past, but their future. Keanu felt the shift instantly, the seriousness returning to her voice. He asked her gently what she meant. She hesitated, pressing her hands together tightly, as if holding back the weight of the truth she carried. She said she recently received a letter. A letter that mentioned him. A letter that mentioned her. A letter that revealed something they never expected. Keanu leaned in, his breath caught. She whispered that someone from her past, someone she trusted, had left her something important before they passed away. Something that involved both of them. Something that explained why that person spread the rumor, why they manipulated her decisions, why they interfered in her connection with Keanu all those years ago. Sandra's voice cracked as she said she didn't know how to tell him, because the truth was so heavy, so unexpected, so painful, that she feared it would change everything again. Keanu gently placed his hand over hers, urging her softly to trust him, to tell him everything. She inhaled, her chest rising with tension. Her voice trembled as she finally whispered the beginning of the truth. She said the person who betrayed her trust did it because they were trying to protect her from something she didn't know about Keanu. Something personal, something life-changing, something he never told her. Keanu's eyes widened. His mind raced through memories, through secrets he had kept, through the pains he had carried silently, wondering which one she meant. Sandra looked at him with heartbreak in her eyes. And then she whispered the sentence that made Keanu's entire world shift. She said the letter revealed that the real reason she was pushed away was because the person believed Keanu was hiding a truth he was too afraid to share. A truth that could have changed their lives forever. She took a trembling breath, leaned closer, and whispered, "Keanu, they believed you were in love with me too." But before Keanu could respond, before he could breathe, before he could speak the truth rising inside him, a sudden voice echoed through the garden. Someone else had arrived. Someone who had heard enough to destroy everything. The unexpected voice that echoed through the garden felt like a sudden crack in the quiet world Keanu and Sandra had been slowly stitching back together. The sound didn't belong to the soft, healing atmosphere around them. It cut sharply through the air, heavy and intrusive, filled with the kind of tension that made both of them turn at the same time, their hearts tightening as they braced for another wave of chaos they were not prepared for. A shadowy figure stepped into the fading evening light. Sandra inhaled sharply the moment she recognized the silhouette. Keanu felt her hand tremble again, and he instinctively moved closer to her, not out of fear, but out of an unspoken promise that he would stand between her and whatever storm approached next. The person walking toward them was someone Sandra had not seen in years, someone who once knew too much about her life, her emotions, and her fears. Someone she had trusted before that trust collapsed under the weight of betrayal. It was the same person Martin had mentioned, the one who had spread the rumor, the one who had leaked the story, the one who had twisted her truth into something the media would use for noise and drama. Her name was Melanie, a woman who once held Sandra's secrets, a woman she once called a friend. Melanie stepped forward with a tense expression, her eyes locked on both of them. It was clear she had heard enough of their conversation to know she could not pretend innocence. Sandra's breathing became uneven, and Keanu felt her body stiffen beside him. He gently held her hand, grounding her, silently reassuring her that she was not facing this alone. Melanie stopped a few feet away, her posture stiff, her face carrying a strange mix of guilt and stubborn defensiveness. She tried to speak casually, but her voice trembled. She said she hadn't meant to overhear the conversation. She said she had come to talk to Sandra. Her eyes flicked toward Keanu briefly, but she quickly looked away as if facing him made her uncomfortable. Sandra's voice was soft but sharp. She asked Melanie why she was there. Melanie hesitated, then took a breath and confessed she had come to explain herself, to try to justify her choices, to tell Sandra there were things she didn't understand about what happened years ago. She said she knew the rumor had resurfaced, and she felt she had to speak before things spiraled further out of control. Keanu tightened his jaw slightly. He had always preferred to stay away from conflict, but he wasn't about to let anyone cause Sandra more pain. He stayed silent for now, allowing Sandra to confront the person she once trusted. Melanie began talking quickly, her words rushing out as if she had rehearsed them many times but never found the courage to say them. She said she had acted out of concern. She said she believed Sandra was falling too deeply for someone who was emotionally unavailable. She said she feared Sandra would end up heartbroken. And she claimed she only spread the rumor because she thought creating distance between them would help Sandra focus on her work, on her stability, on her future. Sandra stared at her, stunned. Her voice shook as she asked Melanie if she truly believed hurting her was the best way to protect her. Melanie lowered her eyes, unable to answer directly. She said she made mistakes. She said she was afraid Sandra would rely too much on Keanu, especially during a time when he was carrying emotional burdens of his own. She admitted she purposely twisted certain moments to push them apart, believing she was doing the right thing. Sandra stepped closer, her voice trembling with controlled emotion. She asked Melanie why she believed she had the right to interfere in something she didn't understand. Melanie swallowed hard before admitting her reasons weren't entirely pure. She said she had been jealous of the closeness Sandra shared with Keanu, jealous of the tenderness between them, jealous of the comfort they found in each other. She said she had let her insecurity disguise itself as protection. Keanu felt a slow anger rise inside him, but he kept his voice calm. He asked Melanie why she never spoke to him directly if she thought he was emotionally unavailable. Melanie couldn't meet his eyes. She muttered that she had heard stories about his grief, his losses, his emotional walls. She assumed he wouldn't be able to give Sandra what she wanted. Keanu took a slow breath and told her quietly that assumptions can destroy more than truth ever could. Melanie's eyes momentarily softened with regret, but the damage had already been done. Sandra wiped a tear from her cheek and asked why Melanie spread the rumor again now after all these years. Melanie hesitated for a long moment before confessing that she didn't intend for the story to resurface so widely. She said she shared it with one person, someone she believed would keep it private, but that person betrayed her, passing it on to the press. She said she panicked when the story grew and she didn't know how to stop it. She said she never wanted Sandra to feel humiliated or exposed. Sandra took a shaky breath, looking exhausted, overwhelmed, and heartbroken by the truth. She told Melanie that trust was something fragile, something precious, something difficult to rebuild once broken. Melanie nodded slowly, tears gathering in her eyes. But then, unexpectedly, Melanie revealed something else, something that finally connected every missing piece in the story. She said she had received a letter, too. Sandra's eyes widened. Keanu felt his heart jump. Melanie said the letter was from the same person who wrote to Sandra, the same person who had passed away, the same person who believed they were protecting her. She said the letter she received explained the entire reason behind their interference. It explained that they had acted out of fear, not malice, fear that if Sandra and Keanu got too close, they would both get hurt. Melanie said the letter revealed something shocking, something she never understood until now. It revealed that the person who interfered between them believed Keanu was hurting emotionally on a level Sandra never knew. Not because he didn't care about her, but because he cared too much. The person believed Keanu felt deeply, painfully, genuinely. They believed he had fallen for Sandra in a quiet, overwhelming way that terrified him. Melanie's voice broke as she said the person believed Keanu's feelings were so strong that they might consume him during a vulnerable time in his life. And they feared Sandra, with her tenderness and empathy, would go all in, giving more of herself than she could handle. They feared both of them were too gentle to survive the emotional storm together. Keanu closed his eyes, overwhelmed. Sandra covered her mouth with her trembling hands as tears fell freely. Melanie said the letter apologized for everything. It asked for forgiveness. It admitted that pushing them apart was wrong. It admitted that it was unfair, destructive, and selfish. It admitted that the person acted out of fear, not wisdom. It admitted that they convinced themselves they were saving two hearts from breaking, while actually breaking them apart. Melanie stepped backward slowly. She said she came not to justify her actions, but to return something. She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. An old, worn envelope with both their names written gently on the front. Sandra's breath caught. Keanu stared at it, his heart pounding. Melanie said the letter belonged to both of them. She said she had kept it for years, too afraid to give it, too ashamed of her role in everything. But now, hearing them speak, hearing their pain, hearing their truths, she knew she couldn't keep it any longer. She handed the envelope to Sandra, her hands trembling, then stepped back once more. She said she was sorry, deeply, truly, painfully sorry, and then she walked away quietly, vanishing from the garden like a fading shadow. The garden fell silent. The envelope felt heavy in Sandra's hands. Keanu gently touched her arm, guiding her to sit again beneath the old tree where their truths had finally surfaced. She opened the envelope with shaky fingers. Inside was a letter written in soft, careful handwriting. She unfolded it slowly, her eyes scanning the first lines. And then she gasped. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She handed the letter to Keanu, unable to read further. He read the words quietly, his chest tightening with each sentence. The letter said the person who interfered had seen something between them, something rare, something deep, something real. They wrote that the connection between Keanu and Sandra reminded them of something they once had and lost. They wrote they feared watching the two of them fall apart the same way. They wrote they feared Keanu's grief would swallow him again if he loved too deeply. They wrote they feared Sandra's heart would break if she gave too much. But the letter ended with an unexpected, heartbreaking truth. They admitted they had been wrong. They admitted they should never have stood in the way. They admitted Keanu and Sandra were meant to be in each other's lives in a way they never understood. They admitted fear had driven their decisions, not love. And they begged both of them for forgiveness. Sandra cried quietly as Keanu read. When he finished, he placed the letter gently on the ground beside them. He turned toward her, his expression soft, full of love he no longer needed to hide. He reached out and held her face in his hands. Sandra looked at him through her tears. With a trembling voice, she whispered that she wished they had known all of this years ago. Keanu leaned his forehead against hers, their breaths mingling softly. He whispered that what mattered now was not the years lost, but the time they still had. She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. And then, for the first time in all the years they had danced around their feelings, Keanu spoke the words he never allowed himself to say. He whispered that he loved her, not as a memory, not as a regret, not as a possibility, but as a truth he had carried for years. Sandra broke into a silent cry, her hands gripping his gently. She whispered she loved him too, still always, quietly, deeply. They held each other in the soft, healing quiet of the garden, feeling the weight of years lift from their shoulders. The pain remained, but it transformed into something meaningful, something that shaped them rather than crushed them. The truth had hurt them, but it had also freed them. As the evening light faded and the world around them softened, Keanu and Sandra finally allowed themselves to step into a new chapter, one built on honesty, courage, and the kind of love that survives silence, distance, fear, and time. They stood together beneath the old tree, holding hands. And for the first time in their long, complicated story, nothing stood between them. Their truth finally belonged to them. And this time they weren't letting go.